Thanks everyone for joining us in the part 2 of our webinar series with Mirantis. Really looking forward to this. With me, I've got Edward. So Edward is part of the core Lens product team at Mirantis. It's responsible for developer relationships and the growth, I've been told, and seeking out Kubernetes pain points to help streamline developer and operator initiatives. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the intro, and thank you Nuaware for having myself and Mirantis be here today. And I want to thank everybody in the audience today for joining us for hopefully what will be an amazing session around Kubernetes, as well as leveraging Lens the IDE to get started with your Kubernetes initiatives. So as Maria mentioned, I am responsible for growth and developer relations here at Mirantis. My biggest focus is really seeking out pain points within Kubernetes and other cloud native initiatives to help developers, operators, site reliability engineers seek out or help them with their problems within Kubernetes and the cloud native ecosystem. So a little bit about Kubernetes, and I'm sure we all already understand this, but we can just jump into this real quick. So Kubernetes is quite challenging. People, organizations, operators, developers want to utilize Kubernetes, but typically adoption is slow and quite complicated. So organizations, yourself, your team members may not be seeing the return on investments that you would like to see for your container initiatives. And this is really where Lens comes in. Lens is a developer-friendly desktop application for all of your Kubernetes needs. It's 100% open source, and it works with any certified Kubernetes distribution, whether that's Mirantis K0s, Rancher K3s, EKS, GKE, Minikube, and so forth. It allows developers to easily onboard any of their native applications directly into Kubernetes, while hopefully improving productivity and increasing your return on investment, while hopefully as well as decreasing your go-to-market time for your container initiatives. So I did want to bring up this stat here, and this was just updated the other day, and this we are the self-proclaimed world's most popular Kubernetes IDE, and we have some stats to back that up. Currently, we have over 5 million downloads, 210 active users, and over 14,000 GitHub Stargates. That may be 15,000 as we're speaking today. So I want to thank here on this slide the entire cloud native community, the Kubernetes community, for really helping us grow. We open sourced this project back in March of 2020. And the growth has been exponential. And again, we want to thank each and every single one of you. If you've used Lens, if you may use Lens in the future, and if you're just part of the cloud native ecosystem, we want to thank you because this community is so amazing. So real quick, what are we going to be talking about today? So we launched Lens 5 on Tuesday of this week, June 29th. And there's several different things we'll be taking a look at with Lens to get a better understanding of Kubernetes, how to get started with Kubernetes, and really observing your Kubernetes resources through Lens IDE. One of the things we'll be taking a look at is multi-cluster management. Lens IDE allows us to work with multiple Kubernetes clusters, as mentioned, any certified Kubernetes distro, and we can switch from cluster to cluster without writing any command line, and always connecting to the correct Kubernetes endpoint, API endpoint, which is so valuable, right? And we'll take a look at that in the demo itself. We also have the context-aware terminal, which is really what powers the multi-cluster management. And the reason it does this is I can switch to my Kubernetes cluster, my EKS cluster, or my GKE cluster, again, without writing any command line here. And it's always matching to that cluster's API endpoint. So that's going to decrease user error and improve efficiency without having to switch to another cluster utilizing kubectl. Instead, we can just do a one-click and we're immediately working with that new cluster. Lens also allows us to deploy applications, and we do this through Helm packaging. And this is another thing where we can deploy an application directly to our Kubernetes cluster, and we'll take a look at that today without writing any kubectl. Within Lens, we've also built an extensions API, which is one of my favorite features within the product itself. And the reason I say it's one of my favorites is it does two very, very important things. One, it allows other cloud native vendors to build extensions on top of Lens IDE that they can leverage our user base for. So if they're a new startup and they have a very cool technology on scanning your cluster for vulnerabilities, you can build an extension on top of Lens and leverage our user base for them to get started with your particular product or service. And on the flip side, it allows our users to leverage other cloud native technologies and vendors within the Lens desktop application for any type of activity that they will be performing to their Kubernetes cluster or their container initiatives. The last three bullet points are actually have just been released, and they are by far my favorite features. And they were released on June 29th, as mentioned, with Lens 5. And this is some of the coolest technology that we have within Lens, besides the observability aspect of Lens. And the first one is Lens Spaces. Lens Spaces is a centralized cloud-based enhancement brought to Lens that allows our users and cluster admins to share access to a Kubernetes cluster directly through the application itself. And we'll take a look at that as well as today. I do not have a colleague with me, so we will probably use a test account where I share the access from one cluster to that test account, and we'll be able to see that that test account can now see my cluster and has specific permissions where they can do X, Y, and Z with that cluster. The next very cool feature that we're bringing, that we brought with Lens 5, is catalog. And catalog should be thought of as your cloud native directory, where you would have all of your different resources in a beautiful directory, meaning, and again, we'll take a look at this, but meaning we have all of our clusters, all of our web links, our automations, and of course our Lens Spaces in one beautiful place where we can filter for that specific asset that we need for whatever type of work activity we're performing today. And the last feature that again has been brought to Lens with the Lens 5 release is Hotbar. And this is another one of my favorite features. And the reason for this is Hotbar should be thought of as the main navigation to Lens. With Hotbar, users can drag and drop a catalog item like a cluster directly to the navigation bar. And that's going to allow them to work much more efficiently. So if I want to switch from cluster to cluster, if I want to go from my cluster to, let's say, a Kubernetes kubectl guide that's online, I can have a web link, or I can have a specific space that I add to that hotbar to very easily add members to the space, remove access, and so forth. So I know that was a breathful, so I'm catching my breath now, but these are the main things that we will be taking a look at today. And through these things, there will be other features that we touch upon. Excellent. I'm going to share one more screen real quick, which is our contact information, where you can find Lens on GitHub. Again, it's a 100% open source project that allows you to connect any certified Kubernetes distro to it. You can download Lens directly at our website as well. Here's my email. There's our Lens email. And of course, please join our Slack community if you find this information helpful. Excellent. Let's begin the presentation, or actually the demo, and hopefully I can teach you guys something today. I'm looking forward to this awesome session, and I hope you are too. Excellent. So right now we are within Lens, the desktop application. Again, you can find Lens from those links I provided with you earlier. Currently, we're looking at the catalog. And as mentioned, the catalog is a new feature brought to Lens, which allows you to browse any of your cloud native resources, Kubernetes clusters, web links, and spaces in one beautiful directory. You can also filter for general resources like your catalog or your Lens preferences. And from here, you have the ability to click into your general preferences. I can switch to light mode if I want. These are just cool little functionalities that we've given to our users so they can build whatever type of work environment they want to be using when leveraging Lens. we'll switch back to dark because that's what I care for. The proxy, Kubernetes, our telemetry, and that's real quick the general items within your catalog. But then when we can take a look at our clusters, I can click on my production cluster. It would open up this screen here, and then we can always see specific details about this cluster. It's Edward's production cluster. It's a Kubernetes cluster. The source is local. The status is connected to Lens, and of course the labels it's associated with. So we can see the distro is GKE. And instead of taking a further look at catalog, I think it would be valuable to actually just jump into the cluster itself. So here you guys can see the cluster. Before diving directly into the cluster, viewing its resources, its objects and pods, I do want to mention that there's two ways to actually add a cluster to Lens. The first way is brought with Lens 5 is Lens searches your operating system for a kubeconfig file. And if it matches a specific kubeconfig file, which Lens can do it automatically. Yes, I did use that word automatically. It will connect the cluster directly to Lens. Another way to do this is going to your catalog, clicking clusters and adding the plus icon here. And then you can directly click or copy and paste your kubeconfig directly to Lens here as well. This is what Lens is looking for on your operating system. And that's how it will automatically leverage your cluster and actually add it to Lens. Great. Let's jump back to our cluster. I'll click this here. So this is my cluster. And as you can see, we're immediately seeing specific metrics on my cluster itself. We can see our CPU to our memory in the last hour. And this will give us a very good understanding of how our cluster is performing through the pre-built-in Prometheus as mentioned. So to take a look at the pre-built-in Prometheus real quick, we can go to the cluster settings. We can always add namespaces if we choose to do so. We can see our metrics. So we're auto-detecting the metrics here. And if you have all of these enabled, it will build out that beautiful observability within your cluster itself that we see on my current cluster. So let's go back to our cluster and actually begin the demo itself. So this is my production cluster. The distro is GKE. It's extremely easy to add it to Lens as described already. One of the things I want to mention here is Lens is always leveraging the role-based access control from your kubeconfig file, and we stay true to that. So if you don't have the correct permissions for your Kubernetes cluster via your kubeconfig file, there's of course going to be specific things that you will be unable to perform on that cluster. We can take a look at our nodes in real time, click into our nodes, and immediately get a much more granular view of how this node is performing, again, in the last hour through the pre-built-in Prometheus. From the CPU to the memory, the disk, and the pods. And we always have different details labeled here. We can see when it was created, we can see the operating system, we can see the image, the kernel version, and of course your labels and annotations, very important. And we can scroll further down to see which pods are running on top of this node currently, with the status and so forth. Excellent. One other thing I want to take a look at before moving on into the demo is the multi-cluster management functionality that Lens gives us. On the left-hand side, this is our hotbar, and I have several different items and resources added to my hotbar to improve my productivity when working with a specific type of cluster, whether it's production cluster, proof of concept cluster, development cluster, and so forth. Clicking this icon here, this is another cluster, and I immediately see, and you can see how it changes, right? If I'm in my cluster overview screen and I click here, we can see it's a different cluster. And to really show that it is a different cluster, we can run a quick command line. Take a look at our nodes. And we can see these nodes here, as well as the version they're associated to. And we can see they match here, but if I jump to that other cluster and run a quick command line, go to nodes, we can see these are different nodes, right? So whenever I click into a new cluster, and this is that multi-cluster management tool here, whenever I click into a new cluster, we're always connecting to the correct Kubernetes endpoint, which is extremely important. And this is going to improve that efficiency that I talked about when working with multiple Kubernetes clusters. Again, whether it's Minikube, EKS, GK, EK0s, and so forth. Works with any certified Kubernetes distro. Excellent. I'm glad we touched on that. And of course, you can have as many clusters as you would like. From here, we'll go to our overview screen. And this here that you can see is it's all color coded from our pods to our deployments, our stateful sets, our daemon sets, our replica sets. We can see it's all green. That's fantastic. Everything is running. But if I jump to my other cluster and go to our overview screen, we'll have some other, yeah, you can see this cluster is much bigger. We have some other color-coded items like pending here. Another thing that we would see is errors, right? And warning messages. So at the bottom, when I scroll down, we can see specific events that are happening in real time, when it happened, how many times it happened, when Lens last saw this error or warning, and of course, the namespace it's associated to and the involved object. So clicking here, I can immediately get a much better understanding of what is going on with this specific event. Again, the object it's related to, when it was seen, and I can very easily click and navigate to that object. Clicking WordPress here, we've just navigated to that object. We can see what's going on. The status is waiting. We have no metrics that it's showing currently. We can see the environment, the readiness, and so forth. This is extremely, extremely useful. I'm actually going to close my Google browser real quick. Excellent. Go back to our overview screen. Scroll up. So now we'll click into pods. And this, again, and this follows Lens everywhere, this specific user interface where we can easily leverage and understand all of the resources within our Kubernetes cluster, all of the pods, and we have the ability to filter. I'm sure if you all are a little bit more experienced with Kubernetes, being able to view all of your resources, your pods, and so forth, you have to run many different command lines, especially to see how they're running, the nodes they're associated to, what it's controlled by, and of course, the namespace it's also associated to. So we can also filter by namespace if we choose to do so. You can just see Lens metrics. Now we see all of the pods associated to the namespace Lens metrics. And of course, we can dive directly into these and begin troubleshooting, viewing, and so forth. On the top right-hand side, whenever you take a look at a specific Kubernetes object, you have different functions that you may be able to perform based off of the role-based access control from your kubeconfig file. So I can always view my logs if I choose to do so. I can search through the logs if I wanted to. You can also cordon into a node, shell into a node. You can cordon, you can drain, and of course you can edit this specific object as well. If I click object, you can begin editing this object, right? And this is the IDE side of Lens. It's being able to jump directly into the resource, change things, configure things, debug, test, and so forth. And we'll close this. We'll jump back to our pods. We'll unfilter, and this is filtered similar to Excel, where you would have to uncheck it. And of course, we can click directly into them and get a better understanding of how this particular object is performing and all of the details associated. We can take a look at our deployments. Again, same filtering mechanism is available here as well. But what I want to do here is actually deploy an Nginx deployment real quick. I have the code on my notepad. I wouldn't want to have to write all of the code in a demo, especially a live demo. But I do have the code in my notepad. So this is another functionality that Lens gives us. I'll grab my code. click this small plus icon, and you have two options. You can do a terminal session again, or you can create a resource. Before creating the resource, I do want to show you all why it's so valuable to have all of your objects in this beautiful interface. I come to the terminal and I run a quick command line. We can see everything within our Kubernetes cluster currently. But to view this specific pod, this Elasticsearch pod, I'd have to write another command line, right? I'd have to, if I want to see this specific daemon set, I'd have to run another command line. This deployment, I'd have to run another command line. But Lens really takes all of that away, right? We're able to click, view, understand, switch from object to object very easily, very efficiently when working with Kubernetes. And this is why this is part of the getting started with Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is challenging, as mentioned, and this really takes a lot of the challenging aspects of Kubernetes away when you leverage an application like this. Excellent. Now let's actually deploy that Nginx resource. I'll do create and close. You can see the resource has been successfully created. And it should be somewhere here. So let's see where it is. And we can see it's here. And this is the same resource that I've deployed in the past. And that's why you can see the age of it, that it isn't one day. But that makes sense because, again, it's been deployed in the past. It's already on this cluster. We can see, again, how it's performing in the last hour. But what I do want to show you is Lens lets us also leverage Kubernetes scaling capability, which is also quite important, right? So I can go to this deployment, click this scale icon, and again, based off of your role-based access control from your kubeconfig file, I can immediately scale this deployment up or down to my liking. So we'll scale this up to, let's say, 15. I'll hit scale, and if I scroll down, you can see we're creating the containers now. And you can also see this very cool extension we'll talk about in a bit. But now we can see these containers being created. They're running. And you can see they're being run. They're running. Container still being created. That's a WordPress one, so it doesn't have anything to do with the resource we just built. And of course, we can click directly into these things as well. So from here, we also have the ability, of course, to scale this deployment down. But this isn't the one. Where did you go? Nginx. Maybe you guys, there it is. It's hard for me to see. So we can see all of the containers running currently, the memory associated, and of course I can click onto that pod and be able to view them immediately, right? So this is excellent. But maybe I want to scale this back down. Same process we have here. Scrolling over. We'll scale this back down to 1. And again, Lens is leveraging Kubernetes here. We aren't doing anything. Kubernetes is doing it. And we begin terminating those pods. So we'll give it a second. And they are all terminated. This resource map here that you guys see, we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm sure you're curious. This is actually one of the extensions that somebody has built on top of Lens, which is actually a fantastic extension. We'll talk about that in a bit. Closing this, we can always see our daemon sets, our stateful sets, replica sets. I don't think we have any jobs, no jobs, cron jobs, and so forth. So we talked about several different things so far. We talked about being able to switch from cluster to cluster while always connecting to the correct Kubernetes endpoint. That's going to improve productivity, efficiency without having to write any command line. We took a look at the pre-built-in Prometheus that Lens leverages as well, and how to do it. Again, you would go to the settings of your cluster, scroll down to Lens metrics, check all of these on, and Lens will automatically push Prometheus to your cluster, and you'll be able to see in this beautiful chart how your cluster is performing. We took a look at being able to perform specific actions based off of your role-based access control. We also deployed an Nginx deployment. We were able to view pods, other resources all in real time and how they're performing. Now we're actually going to transition into Helm Charts. And it's quite easy to deploy a Helm chart. As mentioned in the presentation earlier, we can do this without writing any command line as well. So from here, on the bottom of the screen of this little navigation, you'll see apps. That's where our Helm charts live. Clicking into the charts, you can immediately get access to various different repos and Helm charts via Lens. That being said, I do want to mention that if I go to my preferences, oh, it's actually in my Kubernetes cluster. Whoops, that's all right. If I go to my settings, we have our namespaces, metrics, and users have the ability to choose which repo they would want to see within the Helm charts currently. So there's only some specific Helm charts that I'm viewing currently. And we have the Bitnami, we have the Cloudflare, and we have various different ones as well. I think this should be within our preferences, but I guess with the update, they moved it. And oh, here it is. Yes, I was correct. So at the bottom, you can see Helm charts, and you have the ability to grab any repo you choose to do so. There's hundreds of repos here. You would just click this, and then they would be added to that section I showed you within your cluster itself. There's only a couple of repos that I like to use, ones that I trust, which is Stable, Bitnami, of course, Mirantis is Helm chart, which is great, and we have Cloudflare as well. So try to only use Helm charts that you trust. I think that's extremely important to note. Now, going back to our Helm charts, we have the ability to deploy any one of these things directly to our cluster extremely easily. So if I wanted to deploy a WordPress Helm chart, I would search for it, click here, and it immediately gives us the entire package, the introduction, installing it. So you can also install it via terminal or kubectl if you decide to do so, as you can see here. And it gives us all of the other details, resources, and so forth that this Helm chart would perform to our cluster, which I think is really, really important, because typically if you see a well-detailed Helm chart built and with all of the details in this one beautiful place, you can generally, and don't quote me on this, but you can generally trust it a bit more, right? And of course you can click here, and this would take us to that Helm chart as well. And you can read a little bit more about it. View the GitHub stars, so 3.5 thousand stars, that's a lot. So many people like this Helm chart, it's trustworthy. And of course, they will have all of the docs, intros, and everything on how to get started. But you can see by this installing the chart, this is also built in already here, right? It's the same thing. So we're pulling it from GitHub. Click install. Just showing you everything that there is here. And then on the top right-hand side, we click install again, and it begins installing this Helm chart directly to our Kubernetes cluster, again, without writing any command line. And we can see that it was successfully created. We'll view the Helm release. It was updated 9 seconds ago. The namespace is associated with the chart, right? The status, of course, values. You can change these values if you choose to do so. We won't be doing this in the presentation, but you have that option to do so. Scrolling down, we have our notes. Now, here are all the resources that have just been deployed to our cluster. And anything that is hyperlinked, as you can see, is clickable. So if I want to take a look at the service account, the secrets, the config map, persistent volume claim, and so forth, I can easily do so by just clicking it. There's no metrics currently available here, but we can see all the labels and annotations associated as well. And scrolling back down, and click the deployment. We can see how it's performing in the last hour. We just deployed it, so it hasn't done much in the last hour. CPU, memory, network, file system, and so forth. And again, we have the ability to scale if we wanted to do so. We will not do so here. And of course, I can delete this resource and I can edit the resource as well. If I see, for example, errors, I want to debug, I want to change things within this, I have the ability to do so. We'll close this. Excellent. So that is Helm Charts. I do want to mention as well that you also have the ability to port forward with Lens as well. I won't be taking a look at that as of right now, since there's so many different things we're looking at, but within services, endpoints, so forth, clicking here, you can always port forward directly into the particular item that you're interested in. Perfect. So I know we've gone through many different things so far. And these are all of the things that have been a part of Lens for almost the last year now. But now I want to talk about Lens extensions. And this is something that is quite near and dear to myself and the overall cloud native community, because again, as mentioned in the presentation, it really allows the community to build extensions on top of Lens, leverage our user base, but it also allows our user base to leverage other vendors, other amazing technologies within the desktop application for whatever need they have. So with Lens 5, everything has been updated. So many of the extensions that have been built may have to be updated as well. I do know a couple extensions are currently working, or more than a couple. And I also want to mention that there's been over 100 different extensions currently built, but there's only maybe 10 to 15 that are publicly available. And we list those 10 to 15 on a GitHub repository as well that we can take a look at in a minute. So it's easy to download those, install them, and so forth. Going back to my preferences. Excellent. We'll actually go to extensions here. And from here, we can install extensions, whether we've built them ourselves and they're not publicly available. You can do this as well. You can always check out our docs. This is going to really teach you on how to get started with building specific extensions, how to use them, and so forth. And we can also take a look at the available extensions that I just mentioned. And here are the available publicly made extensions. Again, you can make your own extensions and they can also be private. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Excellent. The extension we'll be taking a look at today is the resource map. And just for demonstration purposes, I'll uninstall it. We'll re-download it. We'll find it. We'll download it. Sweet. Jump back over here, click our file. And what is it called? It is called Novella. And so everybody understands this is somebody that is actually part of the Lens team. He built this extension as somebody part of the community, but he is also on Team Lens here at Mirantis, and he's one of the core developers and contributors to this open source project. So I always like to thank him for building this awesome technology. He's one of many, and also building this amazing extension. Cool. As you guys may already have an idea, this extension is actually specific to these resources that we can see here. And this extension has just been updated yesterday to be able to see this resource map in the overview screen. Traditionally, to view these extensions, they're within our custom resources, and then you click resource map here. And why is this extension so cool? Well, this extension shows us how all of our objects are related to one another and what they are connected with. So being new to Kubernetes, this is really going to help you troubleshoot as well, to take a look at, let's say, a pod or ingress or a namespace, and really just understand the status, the containers it's associated with, the labels, and everything else it's connected with as well. You can filter here as well. And we don't have any of those. Let's see, Cube system. And we can immediately see everything associated with the namespace Cube system. So this is a super cool extension. I use it quite a lot for debugging, testing, and just demonstrating the powerful extension that it is. And there's many other extensions as well. We have other cloud native partners that have built vulnerability scanning to be able to scan your cluster for vulnerabilities. There's extensions that have been built as games, like a Space Invaders games, where you can kill your pods in your containers via the game Space Invaders. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it's actually a fun game to play. Don't do that on a production grade cluster, obviously. That's going to cause quite a bit of issues. So we went through many, many different things so far. Now let's transition into what is new with Lens 5. And we did take a look at many of those things, but we never really talked about them. So what's new with Lens 5? Clicking this button here, this will take us back to our catalog, where we can see all of our resources from, again, clusters to web links to spaces. And this is one of the newest features brought to Lens. And the reason we brought this here is because we thought that it'd be extremely valuable to the community, our users, a one-stop shop where you can see all of your resources that you're working with in a very easily digestible interface. And again, you can filter it by general things. So that's your catalog or your preferences. This is how I'm able to jump to preferences in just one click as described, clusters, and so forth. So from here, we're actually going to jump into something new, exciting, and cool, which is Lens Spaces. And as mentioned, Lens Spaces is a centralized cloud-based enhancement brought to Lens that really creates this, makes this go from an IDE to a team-integrated environment. So let's go ahead and build a space. I'm hoping this will work since I'm doing this live and I don't have a colleague here, but I have a feeling it will work, and we'll take a look and we'll see. So clicking this plus icon on the bottom right, we can create a space. A space is going to be that place where you can add clusters to, web links, and then invite a team member to, for them to be able to actually access that cluster, right? And we're not sharing the cluster itself, we're giving them access to the cluster. I think that's extremely important to know. So we'll call this Nuaware space. And now the space has been created. Clicking here, we can immediately get the details of the space. We can open the space. We can create names for the space. We can take a look at security. And now we have the ability to invite new members. I do want to mention, and I somewhat skipped this, that you do need a login and create an account for this particular feature of Lens. Everything we've seen so far with Lens, you do not need a user account up until this point. So everything we viewed, multi-cluster management, pre-built in Prometheus, viewing your pods, your deployments, switching from cluster to cluster, always maintaining the correct Kubernetes endpoint, you do not need an account for this. It's only Lens Spaces. And the reason for this is, it's probably quite self-explanatory, but you need to be able to share that space with somebody, right? And the way we do this is through a user account. But everything else, you do not need a user account. Excellent. So if I logged out real quick, you would log in via Lens login. You can create an account down here. All of your data is encrypted, is end-to-end encrypted, and we do not share this data with anybody. I'll log back in. Oops. A little fast here. Excellent. We're logged in. We'll open Lens. We'll go back to the Nuaware space that we just created. Click to open. We'll go to members, and we'll invite my my dummy account that we are going to hopefully, where it hopefully works, and I believe it will. Tester Edward. Enter. There we go. Tester Edward. Invite sent to Tester Edward, right? So we just sent the invite to my other account. We can see the details. The invite will expire in 7 days. And from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out of my current account. We're going to log back into that tester account. And typically, well, not typically, but moving forward, we will be doing the Lens Spaces demos with another team member across the world. So you can actually see it work that way. But since I didn't have another team member to do this, and I was unsure if I really was going to present Lens Spaces today, I'm doing it myself. So we'll log in. We'll open Lens. We'll go to my profile, go to Spaces, and at the bottom you can see here that I've been invited to the Nuaware space. This is the space that I've been invited to, and here you can see other spaces that I have access to. I can accept this. It's been accepted. Excellent. Now that we have access to this space, we are going to go back to that account. I apologize for this, and actually share a cluster to that space. We'll log back in. We'll open Lens. We'll go to our spaces so we can see the space. We don't need to click the space. We're actually going to go to a cluster and choose a cluster we want to share. So here, if we click the share icon, we can click this button here, or we can click it here. We'll share this cluster. We'll grab our Nuaware space. We can see the members of the space, and then we're going to install the Cluster Connect. The Cluster Connect is the backbone technology behind Lens Spaces that actually connects to the cluster endpoint, where it would give the space access to the cluster, right? So we're giving the space access to the cluster, and then everybody within that space will have access to that cluster. And of course, we're always maintaining the role-based access control, so we can see that it's been shared. And you can also give specific permissions and create team members within that specific space. So clicking spaces here, I can click my Nuaware space, jump here, go to teams, and create a specific team as well if I decide to do so, and give them other more granular permissions. Cool. Closing this, going back to our clusters. Taking a look at this cluster, we can see the new labels on it, right? We still have the cluster here, and it's local. It's part of our operating system, but this cluster is not local. It's the source is Lens Spaces, and we can see that new label here, meaning this space is now, or this cluster is now connected to Lens Spaces. Logging out, logging back in. And you can see the clusters have been added, right? So there was 2 earlier, which is my locals. And of course, we'll always be able to see these locals because it's the same desktop application. But what is new is this Lens Space, right? The Nuaware cluster. And it's currently disconnected. Now, what I'll do is I'll actually add this cluster, or I'll click on this cluster, click to open it. And it begins opening this cluster. Take your time. And the metrics aren't available. The metrics are not available, and you can see you don't get to see the messages and so forth, like the warning message, because I do not have the correct permissions for this particular cluster, right? So we don't see how it's performing at all. No metrics are available, right? And I can't perform specific actions either, from my understanding. So we can't see the pods and so forth, right? Cool. So that is Lens Spaces. Jumping back to my catalog, we'll talk a little bit about Hotbar and why Hotbar is so important and cool. And I'm sure many of you guys have been seeing how I'm navigating to the application already. We can grab this cluster, pin it to the Hotbar, and now we have this Lens Spaces cluster that's been shared, where the access has been shared with me. And I can always just click it immediately, or I can jump to my K0s cluster, or I can jump to my production cluster. And this is all being done very quickly, extremely efficiently, And of course, I can click the CNCF space, go here, view what's going on, view the members and so forth, invitees, all very, very easily. Jump back to my catalog, view my clusters, my web links, and so forth. So hotbars is quite important. And what's so cool also about hotbars is you can add hotbars. And what I mean by that is, as you can see, we have pages here. This is the first page, second page, third page, and so forth. Clicking on this, on the one icon, you can actually add a hotbar, and you can do only production clusters. From here, what you would do is you now have this new hotbar, and I'd go to my clusters within my catalog, and I'd only pin it to this specific hotbar where only my production grade clusters will be here. So when I'm working efficiently with many clusters, and we've seen users have many, many different clusters, large clusters on our desktop application, you can click here. And of course, I can jump back to this hotbar, see all of these clusters, or I know that in this particular hotbar, there's only production grade clusters. So when I'm clicking the items in this hotbar, I know based off of my filtering and me creating this hotbar that only production grade clusters will be here on this hotbar, right? So that's really going to improve that productivity we talked about, that efficiency we talked about, and working with 10, 20, 30, hundreds of different clusters. And we do have users that are working with many, many different clusters. There's a stat that I'm forgetting currently, but I think we have over, I forget the stat, so I don't even want to mention it, but hundreds of thousands of clusters are on Lens. Jumping back to our default, let's talk a little bit about web links. And this is also a new feature brought to Lens. So far in this presentation on the Lens 5 side, the new features, we talked about Lens spaces, sharing access to a cluster. We talked about catalog. Really, it's that directory of all of our resources within the desktop application. We talked about Hotbar. This is the main navigation of Lens, but it's also the way where we can build automations and workflows, knowing that I only have my production grade clusters in this hotbar. I can start working here, and I never need to switch back to my other hotbars if I'm working with my production grade clusters. We'll switch back. Excellent. Now let's talk about web links, which is actually one of my favorite things brought to Lens as well. So what I'll do real quick is I'm going to pin the Lens documentation directly to this current hotbar, LD. And of course, you have the ability to change the naming convention here as well, if you choose to do so. But from here, I'll click this, and we are immediately brought to the Lens documentation. I think this is so, so cool when trying to get started with Kubernetes, but even if you're extremely experienced with Kubernetes, this is a new feature that is going to allow us to have many different shortcuts within Lens and web links for whatever activity we're trying to perform. Maybe we have a kubectl cheat sheet online that we leverage all the time, but switching from Lens to my Google Chrome and so forth is challenging, annoying, and so forth. But what's easy is just clicking directly here. So if I want to view my Kubernetes documentation, I just clicked it, and now we're here, right? So any link works. So to do so, what we would do is we click this plus icon, and we'd copy and paste the link that we care about the most. So I don't know really what link we could put here. Maybe we do this link. So this is the webinar today. We can grab this link, hit the plus icon, link to it, click enter. We'll give it a name, where the website /webinar, and now it's here, right? And it's local. So the ones that say app are pre-built in via Lens. And of course, guys, pin it to my hotbar. I know that this icon is specific to the website. Click here, I'm immediately brought here. So that's one of my favorite functionalities within Lens as well. So that is everything I wanted to talk about today. I know it's been a ton of information from multi-cluster management, viewing all of your Kubernetes resources, deploying a Helm chart, viewing the extensions, taking a look at the new Lens 5 features that we launched on Tuesday of this week, June 29th, from being able to share access to a Kubernetes cluster via Lens Spaces, the new cloud-based centralized enhancement. We took a look at the catalog, which is the new directory within Lens itself, where you can have all of your resources in one beautiful place, and you have the ability to filter by category as well, as mentioned. And we took a look at Hotbar. This is going to be your main navigation, but also a way to build specific workflows if you only want to work with production clusters, development clusters, and so forth. And we, of course, took a look at web links, which is one of my favorite things. When I'm working on Kubernetes clusters, I usually have a kubectl cheat sheet that I like to leverage, and I can just add it here now and easily navigate to that, take a look at it, find the kubectl command line that I needed for whatever particular function I want to perform to my cluster, and very easily do so. Excellent. I will bring it back to you, Maria, and we can maybe answer some questions, get some feedback, thoughts, concerns, and so forth. But this is Lens 5, and the ability to view and get started with Kubernetes very, very easily through a beautiful user interface that, again, is 100% open source and works with any certified Kubernetes distro. Thank you all for joining, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you guys may have.
Definitely. Thank you, Edward, as well. That was really interesting. I'm definitely going to steal your automatically term. I like that. So anyone that's got questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. So feel free to type your questions there. Yeah, I'm sure Edward would be more than happy to answer them. I think we've got a few already.
Yeah. So how does Lens handle access control to Kubernetes clusters? Awesome questions, guys. So the first question, what is the Mirantis Container Cloud tool that you use in the demo? Mirantis Container Cloud is the Kubernetes distro for, or not a distro, but the Kubernetes offering from Mirantis. And what it allows users to do is very easily sync your MCC clusters to Lens without leveraging a kubeconfig file. So you would just log into your MCC instance, put in your details, and you can easily just add that Kubernetes cluster or that directly to Lens. Next question, how does Lens handle access control to your Kubernetes? It's leveraging your role-based access control. It's always leveraging it from your kubeconfig file. So we are not doing anything different. We leverage it from the kubeconfig file. It's all within the kubeconfig file.
Perfect. Any more questions? Oh, there's a new one.
What different flavors of Kubernetes clusters does Lens work with? Excellent question. As mentioned, it works with any certified Kubernetes distro, whether that's K0s, and that's another Kubernetes distribution that's built by Team Lens here at Mirantis. It's extremely lightweight. It works with EKS, K3s, Minikube, and so forth. So again, any certified Kubernetes distro, it will work on Lens. Looks like there's something in the chat as well. I'll pull that up. Hi, hello. That was earlier today.
Cool, I think that's it. No more questions?
It seems that way. Any more questions, everybody?
Edward shared his profiles as well, so I'm sure you're more than welcome to email him or us at Nuaware anytime. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so we'll share that with you as well as the slides.
Yes.
And
I'm just dropping links and so forth in the chat. That's where you guys can find me. There's our website. And I shared earlier, and sorry to interrupt you, but I shared earlier all of the links that you guys need.
Perfect. And thank you again, Edward. That was really, really insightful. Hope everyone enjoyed, and thank you for coming. We'll keep you in the loop for more webinars that we do.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody else. I want to thank you all and Nuaware for having us speak today on behalf of Lens and Mirantis. It was an excellent session. Have a fantastic evening, day, and bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.